Let's start at the very bottom, not of skill, but of World Series experience. The Seattle Mariners are the only current MLB franchise to have never appeared in the Fall Classic. Established in 1977 as an expansion team, the Mariners struggled for relevance for nearly 2 decades, with their first real taste of success coming in the mid-90s. This was thanks to a generation-defining core of Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson, Edgar Martinez, and later Alex Rodriguez. 1995 was a magical season for the M's. Not only did the Mariners make the playoffs for the first time, but they also had one of the most iconic moments in franchise history. And this moment was the double. Edgar Martinez drove in Ken Griffey Jr. to beat the Yankees in Game 5 of the ALDS, helping save baseball in Seattle in the process. It looked like the beginning of a dynasty, but it wasn't, as they would be defeated by the Cleveland Indians in the ALCS. Then came 2001, when the Mariners tied the MLB record for the most regular season wins with 116. Ichiro Suzuki was a rookie sensation who went on to win not only the Rookie of the Year, but also the MVP, while the team was firing on all cylinders. And yet, they lost in the ALCS to the Yankees. And this was after falling to them the previous year. They haven't come that close since, and in fact have only made the playoffs one time since then, where they won a 2022 wildcard series, only to fall to the eventual champion Houston Astros in the division series. The Mariners remain the only team with no World Series ticket punch, but they are currently hanging on to a wildcard spot and are getting generational production from their catcher, Cal Raleigh, who at the time of writing has 38 home runs at the All-Star break, so we'll see if Seattle can break their curse this year. Next up are the Colorado Rockies, another expansion team born in 1993 and raised in the thin air of Coors Field. They've been known for wild offensive stats, especially pre-Humidor, and they're also known for having a very lackluster history of pitchers. The Rockies weren't expected to contend early, but by 1995, just their third season, they had already made the playoffs as a wildcard team. However, their Cinderella moment came in 2007. The team caught absolute fire in September, winning 14 of their final 15 regular season games to sneak into a tiebreaker against the Padres. That game, a dramatic, chaotic 13-inning slugfest, ended with Matt Holliday's infamous "Did he touch the plate" slide, and that launched the Rockies into the playoffs. From there, they swept through the NLDS and Championship Series, going an absurd 7-0, coining the term Rocktober along the way. But then came the Boston Red Sox. With a long layoff before the World Series, the Rockies were cold and the Red Sox swept them in 4 decisive games. Since then, Colorado has returned to the playoffs a few times, including a wildcard win in 2018, but the team never quite recaptured that 2007 magic, and fans are still waiting for their first World Series win, or even win in the series itself. With the way the Rockies have been the past few years, especially up until now in 2025, it's looking like it'll be a long time until the Rockies will have a chance to get their first ring. At least Colorado sports fans have the Avalanche and Nuggets who won recently. The Padres have been around since 1969 and have managed to reach the World Series only twice, only to run into 2 of the greatest teams in baseball history. Their first shot came in 1984, led by future Hall of Famer Tony Gwynn and manager Dick Williams. They overcame the Chicago Cubs in the NLCS, only to meet the powerhouse Detroit Tigers, who had dominated the regular season. The Tigers would win that series in 5 games. Fast forward to 1998, the Padres were back, and once again, Gwynn was still anchoring the lineup. They defeated the Braves in the NLCS, but were completely overmatched by the New York Yankees, who were in the middle of their own late 90s dynasty. That Yankees team won 114 games in the regular season and swept San Diego. This was part of the Yankee streak where they would win every World Series game from the last 4 of the 96 series to Game 2 against the Mets in 2000. Since then, the Padres have been through ups and downs, many more downs than ups. They've built a strong core with players like Fernando Tatis Jr., Manny Machado, and Dylan Cease. And yeah, Dylan Cease is having a down year, but he's still a great pitcher. But deep October runs have been rare for them. They took down their rival Dodgers in the 2022 NLDS, but lost to the Phillies in 5 after the Padres song.
Philly going down to yellow and brown. That's what's in. Padres on the loose. Let's go, Goose.
And most recently lost in Game 5 to the eventual champion Dodgers in the 2024 Division Series. Tampa Bay Rays, the newest team in the MLB, starting in 1998 as the Devil Rays, they were perennial basement dwellers of the AL East. But in 2008, they dropped the devil and flipped the script. Under manager Joe Maddon, and powered by young stars like Evan Longoria and David Price, they made a shocking run to the World Series. Unfortunately, they ran into the Philadelphia Phillies and lost in 5 games. Their second attempt came in 2020. It was a strange COVID-shortened season played in bubbles and empty stadiums. Some would call this a Mickey Mouse season, but I digress. The Rays leaned on analytics, a dominant bullpen, and the electric arm of emerging star Tyler Glasnow. Randy Arozarena emerged as a breakout playoff hero, but once again, Tampa met a stacked opponent in the Los Angeles Dodgers. Despite making it a competitive series, they lost in 6 games. Perhaps most memorable from the series was Brett Phillips' walk-off after he had barely played in the playoffs. The Braves have often been praised for doing more with less, fielding low payrolls, high-efficiency teams that regularly punch above their weight, but when it comes to the World Series, they've yet to find a winning formula. Many wonder if the team's reliance on pure numbers sometimes gets in the way of momentum and instinct, as symbolized by manager Kevin Cash pulling Blake Snell early in Game 6 of the 2020 World Series while he was dealing. The Brewers' history is very interesting. Originally the Seattle Pilots in 1969, the team moved to Milwaukee the following year. They spent their early decades in the American League before switching to the National League in 1998, making them one of the few franchises to play in both leagues. The franchise's golden year came in 1982, back when they were in the AL, nicknamed Harvey's Wallbangers, after manager Harvey Ken. The Brewers were led by Robin Yount, Paul Molitor, and Gorman Thomas. They beat the California Angels in the ALCS and advanced to the World Series for the first time and so far only time in franchise history. They faced off against the St. Louis Cardinals in a dramatic 7-game series. Milwaukee even led 3-2, but dropped the final 2 games as the Cardinals' speed and small ball approach ultimately wore them down. Since then, the Brewers have made the playoffs sporadically, including heartbreaking runs in 2011 and 2018, and even a brutal loss in the 2019 NL wildcard game to the eventual champion Nationals, but they've never returned to the Fall Classic. Fun fact is that until last year, every team that had beat the Brewers in the playoffs went on to play in the World Series, and the Mets broke that streak in 2024. The Nationals were baseball's ultimate late bloomer. Originally the Montreal Expos, the franchise didn't reach a World Series for 50 years, not in Canada and not immediately after relocating to DC in 2005. Then in 2019, everything changed. Led by 19-year-old Juan Soto, Max Scherzer, and a great October from Steven Strasburg, the Nats made a Cinderella run all the way to the Fall Classic, and in the World Series, they defeated the heavily favored Houston Astros in 7 games. Even more astonishing, they won all 4 road games, a World Series first. Their lone appearance is also their lone win, giving them one of the strangest legacies in baseball. A team with a half a century of irrelevance, disappointing playoff performance, and being an underdog even when they won their World Series after losing Bryce Harper. And even that year, they barely got by the Brewers, who may have won if Trent Grisham didn't make an error late in the game. For years, the Texas Rangers were defined by near misses and outright collapses, none more painful than the 2011 World Series. But in 2023, they rewrote that narrative. Let's rewind. The Rangers, originally the Washington Senators, established in 1961, relocated to Texas in 1972. They struggled for decades, but finally broke through in 2010. Led by manager Ron Washington and stars like Josh Hamilton, Nelson Cruz, and Cliff Lee, they steamrolled their way to the World Series, defeating the Yankees in the ALCS, which I remember vividly, even though I wasn't even 8 yet, but I was heartbroken. But anyway, the San Francisco Giants, with their dominant pitching, shut them down in 5 games. Then came 2011, the heartbreak to end all heartbreaks. The Rangers were 1 strike away, twice, from their first title against the Cardinals in Game 6. But David Freese's legendary triple, and then a walk-off homer in extra innings, crushed Texas's dreams. They lost Game 7 and left fans in emotional ruin. What's worse is that it wasn't just a hit that got in the gap or anything like that. Nelson Cruz had a chance to catch it, but completely misplayed it. It took more than a decade, but in 2023, which coincidentally was Nelson Cruz's last season, they finally did it. With a revamped roster featuring Corey Seager, Adolis Garcia, and Nathan Eovaldi, managed by the legendary Bruce Bochy, the Rangers outdueled the Diamondbacks in 5 games, Seager took home World Series MVP, and for the first time in franchise history, Arlington hosted a championship celebration. Unlike many expansion teams, the Arizona Diamondbacks didn't wait long to make a splash. Founded in 1998, they spent big early and it paid off. By 2001, in just their 4th season, they were World Series champions. That 2001 team was anchored by a dominant 1-2 punch in Randy Johnson and Curt Schilling. They faced the New York Yankees, who were coming off 3 straight titles and were heavy favorites, and what followed was one of the most thrilling World Series ever played. Well, thrilling if you're a Diamondbacks fan. I wasn't alive for this, but I can only imagine my reaction if I was. After being pushed to the brink in Game 7, the D-backs staged a legendary 9th-inning comeback against the great Mariano Rivera, and it was capped off by Luis Gonzalez's bloop single against the infielders who were playing in. Arizona's lone title came just weeks after 9/11, making the emotional weight of that series even heavier. The Yankees were America's team, but Arizona had other plans. After that early peak, the D-backs have seen some playoff action, most recently in 2023 when they shocked the world by making it back to the World Series as a 6th seed, but they would fall to the Rangers in 5 games, and then would miss the playoffs the next year on the last day of the season, because the Mets and Braves both won. The Angels story is a long one, full of stars, bad ownership, and a single shining championship moment. Founded in 1961 as an expansion team, and previously known as the California Angels, Anaheim Angels, Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, Mike Trout's of Anaheim, Los Angeles, California, whatever you want to call them, the franchise was often competitive, but couldn't get the job done until 2002. That year, under manager Mike Scioscia and with a scrappy team, the Angels made a Cinderella run. Led by Troy Gloss, Garrett Anderson, and a fiery young reliever named Francisco Rodriguez, who you probably know as K-Rod, the Halos defeated the Giants in a wild 7-game World Series. Most remember Game 6 when the Angels were down 5-0 and just 8 outs from elimination before roaring back with a rally that defined their season. They've had plenty of talent since, most notably the legendary Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani, but haven't returned to the World Series. Injuries, mismanagement, awful contracts, and poor pitching have plagued them, and their lone title feels increasingly like an outlier in a frustrating franchise timeline. Still, 2002 lives on as a magical moment in Anaheim, and it's really sad. Mike Trout will likely never get his chance to win a ring, as he is easily the best Angels hitter of all time, but they've just been a disaster for the past decade plus. The Royals' history is marked by 2 incredible peaks, each spaced exactly 30 years apart, with a long valley of irrelevance in between. Founded in 1969, Kansas City didn't take long to become competitive. By the late 70s and early 80s, the Royals were regular postseason contenders built around George Brett, Frank White, Willie Wilson, and a great pitching staff. After losing the World Series in 1980 to the Phillies, they finally broke through in 1985. That 85 squad was a scrappy, resilient team that came back from 3-1 deficits in both the ALCS and the World Series. They beat the Cardinals in 7 games, aided by a controversial call in Game 6 that still sparks debate to this day. It was redemption for a team that had been knocking on the door for years. Then came the Dark Ages. From 1986 to 2013, the Royals didn't make the playoffs once. It's just insane to think about when you look at how many playoff teams there are now and how long playoff droughts like this are kind of gone. But out of nowhere, the 2014 team, built on defense, speed, and a lights-out bullpen, made a magical run to Game 7 of the World Series, but they ultimately just fell short to the Giants, who won their 3rd in 5 years. The very next year, though, they came back with a vengeance. The 2015 Royals took care of unfinished business, beating the Mets in 5 games to claim their 2nd title. Kansas City hasn't been close since and has only made the playoffs again in 2024, where they lost to the Yankees in Game 4 of the ALDS. But they have one of the best young players in baseball in Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez, who is the lone player left in Kansas City from the 2015 squad. Don't feel too bad for the city, though, considering they also root for the Chiefs. The Lowell Mets have one of the most dramatic and meme-worthy existence in all of baseball. Since their birth in 1962 as the spiritual successors to the departed Brooklyn Dodgers and New York Giants, Mets have had a lot of embarrassing moments with a few peaks. That's probably something I could go over in another video. Their first title in 1969 came out of nowhere. The Miracle Mets, or Amazons, led by Tom Seaver and managed by Gil Hodges, went from last place the year before to World Series champs, and they toppled the heavily favored Orioles in 5 games. It remains one of the most iconic underdog stories in sports history. And they nearly did it again in 1973, a team with the slogan, "You gotta believe," but lost in 7 games to the A's. Then came 1986. That year's Mets were cocky, chaotic, and did some less than ideal things in the clubhouse. However, they were extremely talented with stars like Dwight Gooden, Darryl Strawberry, and Gary Carter. They beat the Red Sox in one of the wildest series ever, thanks to Curb Your Enthusiasm legend Bill Buckner's infamous error in Game 6 and a Game 7 comeback win. Since then, it's been a roller coaster. They lost to the Yankees in the 2000 Subway Series, collapsed in the late 2000s, and fell in 5 games to the Royals in 2015, despite having an elite pitching staff. Every year, Mets fans say it's their year, no matter if Tim Tebow was looked at for a potential roster spot or not. But the Mets were bought by Steve Cohen a few years ago and have competent ownership now, compared to the Wilpons, who also could be talked about in a whole video because of how bad they were. The Blue Jays are the only American League team with a perfect World Series record that has only been to the series twice, going 2 for 2. Born in 1977, the Jays had a slow build in the AL East, but turned into a powerhouse by the late 80s and early 90s. Their first title came in 1992. Backed by stars like Roberto Alomar, Joe Carter, and Dave Winfield, and ace pitchers Jack Morris and David Cohn, they defeated the Braves in 6 games, becoming the first non-US team to win the World Series. Sorry, Expos. But 1993 was even more iconic. Facing the Phillies, the Jays were up 3-2 heading into Game 6. With Toronto trailing in the 9th inning, Joe Carter hit a walk-off 3-run home run off Mitch Williams, and it was one of the most legendary moments in World Series history. Touch 'em all, Joe, still echoes in the memories of Jays fans everywhere. Since then, though, a long drought. The Jays didn't return to the postseason until 2015, when Jose Bautista electrified the fan base with his 3-run home run and signature bat flip. But they lost to the Royals in the ALCS and have yet to recapture the magic of those back-to-back titles. While the Blue Jays have been to the playoffs 3 times since the mid-2010s, they have yet to win even a single playoff game, and even lost to the Twins, breaking a 2-decade-long streak, which I will get to soon. Founded in 1993 as the Florida Marlins, they won their first World Series in just their 5th season, 1997. That team, led by Gary Sheffield, Moises Alou, and a young Livan Hernandez, beat the Cleveland Indians in a dramatic 7-game series, capped off by Edgar Renteria's walk-off single in extra innings of Game 7. Then owner Wayne Huizenga blew up the team almost immediately in a massive fire sale. In 2003, another random collection of talent, including young stars like Miguel Cabrera, Josh Beckett, and Dontrelle Willis, got hot at the right time. They beat the Cubs in the infamous Bartman NLCS and then took down the Yankees in 6 games. Jack McKeon, their 72-year-old manager, became a legend in Miami. The Marlins haven't been back to the World Series since, and their years have been defined by rebuilds, trades, Derek Jeter, and attendance woes. But somehow they remain perfect in the Fall Classic, going 2 for 2 against all odds. That may be because they've only even been to the playoffs twice since and haven't made it past the division series. The Guardians, formerly the Indians, are steeped in baseball tradition. Their first championship came in 1920, the second in 1948, and that's it. Since then, disappointment. They've lost 4 World Series in 1954, 95, 97, and 2016. The 97 loss is infamous, but they were 2 outs away from a title in Game 7 before Jose Mesa blew the save and the Marlins walked it off in extras. Then, in 2016, they blew a 3-1 series lead against the Cubs in one of the most dramatic Game 7s in MLB history. The Indians Guardians hold the dubious distinction of having the longest active championship drought in baseball. This is over 75 years now, and the city is still waiting. Once a National League team that made one forgettable World Series run in 2005, they became an American League powerhouse after their 2013 realignment. They have appeared in 4 World Series since 2017, winning 2 in 2017 and 2022, losing 2 in 2019, 2021. The 2017 team was loaded, but that title will forever be controversial. MLB later confirmed the Astros used a sign-stealing system involving cameras and trash can banging, which you probably know about. This triggered suspensions, firings, and endless debate. Most baseball fans, and even many players, don't consider this to be a legitimate World Series. Despite the scandal, the Astros kept winning, reaching the ALCS every year from 2017 to 2023, and finally losing in the wild card in 2024. But they did claim a scandal-free title in 2022. Players like Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, Justin Verlander, and Yordan Alvarez helped define the string of success, but these Astro teams will forever be mired in controversy. The Orioles' history is a story of reinvention, both as a team and a city. Originally the St. Louis Browns, who never won a title, the franchise moved to Baltimore in 1954 and quickly began to build something special. Their golden era came in the late 1960s and early 70s under manager Earl Weaver, also known as the Earl of Baltimore. With a powerhouse roster featuring arguably the best defensive third baseman of all time in Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, Jim Palmer, and Boog Powell, the Orioles were a model of consistency. They won their first World Series in 1966, sweeping the Dodgers thanks to dominant pitching and defense. They returned in 1969, but were stunned by the Miracle Nets. Baltimore got redemption in 1970 by defeating the Reds, and returned again in 1971, only to fall to the Pirates in a 7-game duel. That run of success continued through the early 80s, and ended in 1983. The Orioles won their 3rd and most recent championship, led by Cal Ripken Jr., Eddie Murray, and a stacked rotation. Since then, the O's have endured long stretches of futility, especially in the 2000s and 2010s, but recent seasons have seen a resurgence of young talent. Despite being disappointing so far in 2025, they have a talented young core with more high-end prospects in their farm system. For the first 97 years of their existence, the Phillies were known more for disappointment than greatness. Founded in 1883, they were one of the losingest franchises in American pro sports and didn't win a single World Series until 1980. That 1980 squad, managed by Dallas Green and led by Mike Schmidt, Steve Carlton, and Tug McGraw, finally brought a title to Philadelphia. Schmidt won the MVP, and the Phillies beat the Royals in 6 games to end nearly a century of frustration. But true to Philly fashion, the good times did not last. They lost the 1983 World Series and didn't return again until 1993. Despite their impressive season, Joe Carter's walk-off home run in Game 6 ended their dreams and remains one of the most iconic plays in World Series history, and a nightmare for Phillies fans. Then came the late 2000s. Behind Ryan Howard, Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, and Cole Hamels, the Phillies won it all again in 2008, this time over the Rays. They returned in 2009, but lost to the Yankees and haven't quite reached that peak again despite recent postseason appearances, including an improbable run to the 2022 World Series where they fell to the Astros. The Twins story is split between 2 cities. Before becoming the Minnesota Twins in 1961, they were the Washington Senators, a team that won it all in 1924 but spent decades mostly in obscurity. The Minnesota chapter began with promise. The Twins reached the World Series in 1965, led by Harmon Killebrew and Tony Oliva, but lost to Sandy Koufax and the Dodgers. Their real glory came in the Metrodome years. The 1987 Twins shocked the world, winning the AL West with just 85 wins, but catching fire in October. With Kirby Puckett, Kent Urbick, and ace Frank Viola, they defeated the Cardinals in a 7-game classic, the first time the home team won every game of the series. They did it again in 1991 in what many consider the greatest World Series ever played. Puckett's walk-off home run in Game 6 is legendary, and Jack Morris's 10-inning shutout in Game 7 sealed the deal over the Braves. Since then, the Twins have struggled to make deep postseason runs, despite regular season success in the 2000s and 2010s. In fact, they set an MLB record for most consecutive playoff losses, mostly thanks to the Yankees, with 18 straight losses over 19 years. The White Sox are one of baseball's oldest teams, but their history is as much defined by scandal and drought as it is by success. Their first title came in 1906 in the All-Chicago World Series, where they upset the powerhouse Cubs. But 13 years later, the team found itself at the heart of the sport's darkest chapter, the 1919 Black Sox scandal. 8 players were accused of throwing the World Series against the Reds in exchange for money from gamblers, and it's a moment that would haunt the franchise for generations. There was a great movie made about this called 8 Men Out, which I highly recommend. The Sox were competitive here and there, but they didn't return to the World Series until 1959, where they lost to the Dodgers. Then, there was nothing for 46 years. But in 2005, the White Sox finally got redemption. Under manager Ozzie Guillen, and with a rotation that pitched 4 consecutive complete games in the ALCS, they swept the Astros in the World Series. Paul Konerko, Jermaine Dye, and AJ Przinsky led the charge, and a long-suffering fanbase finally had its moment. They've returned to the playoffs a few times since, but haven't been able to do much. Just last year, the White Sox arguably had the worst season in MLB history, so the future is not exactly bright. I guess if they do have anything positive to make of this, it's that the Rockies may actually have a worse season than them this year. Few franchises in MLB history have covered more ground than the Braves, both literally and figuratively. They've played in 3 cities: Boston from 1871 to 1952, Milwaukee from 1953 to 1965, and Atlanta from 1966 to now. And they did win a World Series title in all 3. Their first came in 1914 when the Miracle Braves of Boston surged from last place in July to sweep the heavily favored Philadelphia A's. After moving to Milwaukee, they won again in 1957, led by Hank Aaron, Eddie Matthews, and Warren Spahn. But the Braves are most associated with the dominant run they had in the 1990s and early 2000s under manager Bobby Cox. With a rotation featuring Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and John Smoltz, and sluggers like Chipper Jones and Andrew Jones, they won an absurd 14 consecutive division titles. But October often was not in fact seen doing the chop. Their only title during that stretch came in 1995 when they beat the Cleveland Indians in 6 games. Despite multiple World Series appearances in 91, 92, 96, and 99, they couldn't quite seal the deal again. Then, out of nowhere, came 2021. After an injury-riddled season where they lost their star outfielder Ronald Acuna Jr. and only won 88 games in the regular season, the Braves caught absolute fire. They defeated the Brewers and then the Dodgers and moved on to the World Series. In that, they defeated the Astros in 6 games and claimed their 4th championship, proving once again that in October, anything can happen. The whole baseball world outside of the NL East fan base was rooting for the Braves this year to defeat the recently outed cheater Astros. The Detroit Tigers are one of baseball's oldest and most beloved franchises, and also one of its most tortured. Founded in 1901, they've appeared in 11 World Series and won 4, but each one has been hard-earned and spaced across eras. Their first championship came in 1935, led by Hall of Famer Hank Greenberg and player-manager Mickey Cochran. It was a reward for a franchise that had lost the World Series 3 times in the 1900s and twice more in the 1930s before finally getting over the hump. They struck again in 1945, led by the great Hal Newhouser, who I actually covered in another video that you should check out, taking advantage of a war-weakened league to defeat the Cubs in 7 games. After that, the Tigers faded for a while, until 1968, when one of the greatest pitching performances in World Series history lifted them back to glory. Denny McLain won 31 games that season, but it was Mickey Lalich who stole the show in the Fall Classic, pitching 3 complete game victories to beat Bob Gibson and the Cardinals in 7. Then came 1984, where Detroit was just completely dominant. The Tigers started a ridiculous 35-5. They coasted through the regular season and took down the Padres in the World Series. Alan Trammell, Jack Morris, and Kirk Gibson were among the heroes. Since then, it's been heartbreak for Motor City. The Tigers won the pennant in both 2006 and 2012, but lost both years. And the rebuild has been long and painful, but things seem to be getting better for them after a shocking playoff appearance in 2024, and an even more shocking performance to this point in 2025, where they have the best record in baseball. If any team was defined by its absence from the World Series winner's circle, it was the Chicago Cubs. One of the oldest franchises in sports, the Cubs won early, 1907 and 1908. Back-to-back championships in the dead ball era, but then, nothing. They won 7 more pennants through 1945, losing every single one. And after that, they didn't even get to the Fall Classic for another 71 years. The curse of the Billy Goat, Steve Bartman, Black Cats, Leon Durham, you name the heartbreak, the Cubs lived it. Then came 2016, led by a young core of Chris Bryant, Anthony Rizzo, Javier Baez, and the managing of Joe Madden. The Cubs finally broke through. After falling behind 3-1 to the Cleveland Indians in the World Series, who was and still is facing a huge World Series winning drought of their own, they mounted a dramatic comeback. Game 7 with rain delays, blown leads, and Rajai Davis's clutch homer, it was an instant classic. But when Mike Montgomery recorded the final out in the 10th inning, the weight of 108 years finally fell away. This is often considered to be one of the best World Series of all time, and arguably the best World Series game of all time. Back to the Future was only a year off from their prediction of the Cubs winning in 2015 all the way back in 1985. This finally gave Cubs fans relief after their 108-year streak of failure was over. Imagine living over 100 years and still not seeing your team win a championship. Just brutal. The Pittsburgh Pirates are a franchise steeped in history, both tragic and triumphant. With 5 World Series titles, they've left a huge mark on baseball history. Their first championship came in 1909, led by the legendary Honus Wagner. That year, they beat Ty Cobb's Tigers in a battle of early titans. They followed up in 1925, becoming the first team to come back from a 3-1 deficit in the World Series, toppling the Washington Senators in 7 games. But it's the 1960 World Series that truly defines Pirates mythology. That year, despite being badly outscored by the Yankees overall, the Pirates forced a Game 7, and in the bottom of the 9th, Bill Mazeroski hit the only walk-off home run in World Series Game 7 history. It's still one of the most iconic moments in sports. They added 2 more titles in the 1970s, with 71 and 79, led by the legendary Roberto Clemente and later by Pops Willie Stargell. The 79 team, nicknamed the Family, was all about unity. Their comeback against the Orioles cemented their place in history. Since then, though, a long drought. A 20-year losing streak haunted the franchise from the early 90s to 2013. Despite brief playoff success with Andrew McCutchen in the mid-2010s, they haven't sniffed a World Series in decades. But in terms of legacy, the Pirates still stand tall even with their decline. Their franchise record recently dropped to 500 after being a winning team for the longest time. By the time this video comes out, I'm sure they will be fully under 500, and that's sad what happened to a once proud franchise. The Reds don't always get the credit they deserve, but this is a franchise with serious history. Their first World Series title came in 1919. Though it's remembered more for the infamous Black Sox scandal than for Cincinnati's victory. But their true glory days came in the 70s, when the Big Red Machine featuring Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez, and hit king Pete Rose became one of the most feared lineups in history. They won back-to-back titles in 1975 and 76, and the 75 series against Boston remains one of the greatest ever played. Their last ring came in 1990 when they stunned the heavily favored Oakland A's with a 4-game sweep. In fact, their owner was actually so upset about it being a sweep due to less revenue that she refused to even pay for a celebration. Since then, playoff success has been rare, but their history is rich and underappreciated, even if they haven't won in over 30 years. The Giants' journey spans coasts, centuries, and generations. Starting in New York in the 1880s, they were one of the earliest juggernauts of the game. They won 5 championships in New York in 1905, 1921, 22, 33, and 1954, before moving west to San Francisco in 1958. Then, a long drought. Despite legends like Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, and Juan Marichal, the Giants never won it all in the 60s or 80s. They won the pennant in 89, but were swept by the A's in the Earthquake series. And in 2002, they were just 5 outs away before the Angels stormed back in Game 6. But starting in 2010, the Giants redefined modern baseball dynasties. Led by manager Bruce Bochy, ace Madison Bumgarner, Buster Posey, Tim Lincecum, and Pablo Sandoval, the Giants won 3 titles in 5 years in 2010, 2012, and 2014. The 2010 team broke the drought that they've had since the 50s at that point. The 2012 team swept the Tigers, and the 2014 team, that was the Mad Bum series, with Bumgarner throwing 21 innings and posting a .43 ERA. It was a postseason performance for the ages. With 8 titles and over 140 years of history, the Giants are one of the sport's premier franchises. Also, as of the time of writing, the New York Giants and San Francisco Giants actually did finally get together for dinner, so I just thought that was worth mentioning. Few teams have been as consistently dominant or as consistently snakebit as the Dodgers. Between their Brooklyn and Los Angeles eras, they've appeared in a National League best 26 World Series, but just walked away with 8 wins. Their Brooklyn years were defined by heartbreak, especially at the hands of the Yankees. It wasn't until 1955 that they finally broke through. After moving west in 1958, they found success with pitching legends like Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale, winning titles in 59, 63, and 65. Fast forward to the 80s, in 1988, Kirk Gibson's miracle walk-off in Game 1 became one of baseball's most iconic moments. This would set the stage for a shocking World Series win over the A's. In the 21st century, the Dodgers became a playoff mainstay, but couldn't seal the deal, losing in 2017 and 2018, before finally winning it all in 2020 in a shortened Mickey Mouse season. And they won most recently in 2024, where they finally won in a full season, adding an 8th ring thanks to the bonehead decisions from Aaron Boone and a collapse by the Yankees. But stars like Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and Shohei Ohtani now in Dodger Blue, they might not be done yet. The Red Sox were an early powerhouse, winning 5 titles between 1903 and 1918, thanks in part to a young Babe Ruth who helped them win the 1916 and 1918 titles as both a dominant pitcher and slugger. Then came the curse, also known as the Curse of the Bambino. After selling Ruth to the Yankees in 1919, Boston didn't win another World Series for 86 years. The franchise endured decades of heartbreak, losing in 7 games in 46, 67, 75, which also had the Carlton Fisk walk-off Game 6 home run, and that was an iconic moment, also mentioned in Good Will Hunting if you've seen that, but they ended up losing Game 7. And of course, 1986, the infamous Bill Buckner game. But in 2004, everything changed. Down 3-0 to the Yankees in the ALCS, the Red Sox made an unprecedented comeback to win 4 straight, the greatest series turnaround in MLB history. They then swept the Cardinals to finally break the curse. To this day, it's the only time an MLB team came back from a 3-0 deficit. They added 3 more championships in the modern era, with 2007 where they swept the Rockies, 2013 where they rallied a city, healing from the Boston Marathon bombing, and 2018 where the 108-win team steamrolled the Dodgers. With stars like David Ortiz, Manny Ramirez, Pedro Martinez, Mookie Betts, and more, the Red Sox have had a lot of 21st century success after 86 years of coming up short. The A's are one of baseball's oldest and most successful franchises, and also one of its most nomadic. They began in Philadelphia, moved to Kansas City, settled in Oakland in 1968 for a while, are in Sacramento now, and will be in Vegas shortly. Across their first 3 eras, they've won 9 World Series titles, a total only 2 teams have bested and 1 other team is tied. Their first dynasty came in Philadelphia in the 1910s, led by Connie Mack and featuring stars like Eddie Collins and Home Run Baker. They won 3 titles, 1910, 1911, and 1913, and added 2 more in 1929 and 1930. Before financial struggles dismantled the team. Fast forward to the 1970s, the A's were reborn in Oakland. From 1972 to 1974, they won 3 straight championships, led by Reggie Jackson, Catfish Hunter, Vida Blue, and Raleigh Fingers. The team was talented, had some great mustaches, and were famously dysfunctional, but dominant nonetheless. They made it back in the late 80s with the Bash brothers, Mark McGwire and Jose Canseco, and flamethrower Dennis Eckersley, and won it all in 1989. Sweeping the Giants in the earthquake-interrupted Battle of the Bay. Since then, the A's have had a lot of great regular seasons and pioneering analytics like we learned in Moneyball, but no World Series wins. Their low-budget model often leads to playoff exits and roster sell-offs. Despite this, their legacy as a historically great franchise remains firm, even if their future is up in the air with their upcoming move to Vegas. The St. Louis Cardinals. The Cardinals are the National League's crown jewel when it comes to the championship. Their 11 World Series wins trail only the Yankees, and their success spans every baseball era. Their first came in 1926, beating the Yankees behind Hall of Fame player-manager Roger Sornsby. From there, they built dynasties in the 1930s and 40s, with stars like Dizzy Dean, Stan Musial, and the Gas House Gang. The Redbirds added titles in 1942, 1944, and 1946 before a slump, but came roaring back in the 1960s. Bob Gibson, Lou Brock, and Curt Flood helped lead St. Louis to 2 more championships in 1964 and 1967, and one heartbreaking Game 7 loss in 1968. The 1980s brought Whitey Herzog's Whitey Ball, a fast, aggressive style that paid off with a 1982 championship and 2 more NL pennants. Their most iconic modern title came in 2011, a team that refused to die. David Freese's walk-off home run in Game 6, after being 1 strike away from elimination twice, is one of the greatest moments in World Series history. The Cardinals won Game 7 and added that to their 2006 win behind Albert Pujols and Chris Carpenter. That World Series can use an entire video because of how improbable it was. They only won 83 games in the regular season. No matter the decade, the Cardinals win, and they win a lot. And now we have the mighty Yankees. The New York Yankees are the most successful franchise in baseball and arguably in all of professional sports. 41 pennants, 27 championships, their run is unparalleled and their impact on the sport is unmatched. It all started in 1923 with the opening of Yankee Stadium, also known as the house that Ruth built. From there was decades of dominance. Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, the legends are endless. They won 20 titles from 1923 to 1962, then 5 more in the 60s and 70s. The late 1990s were a machine with 4 titles from 96 to 2000, led by Derek Jeter, Mariano Rivera, manager Joe Torre, Andy Pettitte, Jorge Posada, Bernie Williams. There was just so many great players on those teams. Their most recent championship came in 2009, powered by the bat of Godzilla, Hideki Matsui, and the arm of CC Sabathia, who they signed in free agency. But even the Yankees haven't been immune to droughts. Despite enormous payrolls and regular postseason appearances, they went 14 years without returning to the World Series and then collapsed against the Dodgers after returning in 2024. Still, no matter who you root for, the Yankees set the bar. Love them or hate them, their place in baseball lore is eternal. And that's the video. Depending on when this video comes out, it's either my first or second video in 4 years, and as you can probably tell, this took a lot of time to make. So liking, commenting, and subscribing would really help me out. If you did enjoy, I hope to see you back for another video, and also let me know your video ideas in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.